So, neurology, what I like to say is that the brain controls everything. Literally, everything is controlled by the brain. We're still just learning so much about the brain. Like, we're still learning about the different receptors and the changes in our body that the brain has control over that we didn't realize before. Looking at genetic mutations, the mutations are the biggest thing that we are looking at in neurology. For instance, Alzheimer's disease, there is an early onset Alzheimer's disease out there that has a genetic component to it. And those for patients that present to us with symptoms of Alzheimer's disease, brain scans look like Alzheimer's disease, but they're under the age of 65. We would run their genetics to see if that's what it is. And not really from a treatment standpoint for the patient, but for their generations to come to understand that this is the type of genetic predisposition or genetic marker that they already have that they could pass on to their loved ones. Genetics and sleep are two things that need to really be looked at. So these little things are coming out, these little proteins, these little things are coming out during sleep. But it's all about creating mutations, basically. If you've been from a simplest standpoint, you're trying to decrease the amount of mutations that could cause cancer or cause disease. The campaign of, oh, alcohol is okay, or a little bit of red wine, it's the phenols that are in grape leaves or grapes that is the actual antioxidant. It's not the alcohol. Come on. Jesus did make water into wine, but let's just be real about it. That was not the same wine that we drink today.
A podcast for patients.
This is Genetics for Healthcare, a podcast dedicated to patients and their caregivers to help them advocate for a precision medicine approach to their care, including disease screening, prevention, and treatment. You can find us at geneticsforhealthcare.com or wherever you get your podcast. Today, I am grateful to have Dr. Kimberly Johnson Hatchett, also known as Dr. Kim. You may have seen her on Instagram or TikTok or any of her social media platforms, board certified neurologist. And she's here to talk to us about her world of treating neurological diseases. Dr. Kim, thank you for being a guest on Genetics for Healthcare.
Thank you for having me here. I'm so excited.
For those who may not be aware, you describe yourself as a non-traditional physician in your background. I think it's fascinating. Can you share your path to a career in medicine and how that possibly shapes your approach to treating patients today?
Okay, so I do describe myself as a non-traditional physician just because I started off with a business background. And originally, when I went to the University of Missouri, Columbia, Mizzou, M-I-Z, when I went to Mizzou, I started off with a chemical engineering major. And I thought, okay, I'll do engineering. And then I got done with calculus and realized, crap, I hate engineering. I like numbers. What can I do to get out in 4 years? I'll get a finance degree. So I kind of just got that degree because I like numbers. And I have a family that was really big in education. And my parents thought the pathway to greatness was through business school. So my sister had a business degree, so I got a business degree. That science background kind of was a window of what was possible. And then when I got done with college, I started into sales. I did elevator sales of all things.
Wow.
And
Okay.
then ended up doing the holy grail of sales, which is pharmaceutical sales. And in pharmaceutical sales, I realized that I had the aptitude to understand the pathology and it fascinated me. What really fascinated me and really turned my brain on was understanding what the immune system does and the warfare that's happening inside of our bodies when our bodies are faced with a virus, and how all of these different cells have different jobs. And that fascinated me. So that's what got me interested. And then when I would call on physicians, they were like, you understand this pathology more than most. You need to think about doing this. At the same time, I was fortunate, and I'll say this, fortunate to have my first marriage end. It gave me the freedom to pursue anything that I dreamed of. I had no one to answer to anymore except for God. And I realized that He had given me the aptitude to understand medicine and to be able to explain it in a way that was easily understood. So I knew that had I not pursued this, I would have to answer for it.
Mm.
So I pursued it. And that is my pathway into thinking that I needed to go and understanding that I needed to go into medicine in order for not just my people, but for people in general to be able to understand it. I feel like I've been blessed with that ability to explain things in a way that anybody can understand. If I can, and I always say, if I can do this and get a medical degree, damn, anybody can. But I've realized now that it's a gift and that I have to utilize that gift or I'm going to have to answer for it. So that's kind of my story.
Okay, that's powerful. We got to double click into that because we just can't gloss over that because people are out of work. They're transitioning. You have Gen Xers who are thinking about the next chapter of their lives and how they make income. There are a number of people who have experienced layoffs or transitions in their career. I want to get to the root of because you mentioned in your origin story, you didn't, as many physicians, have that vision or that drive to say when you were young that I want to be a physician or I want to be a doctor, or you didn't come from a background where your family members or a significant role model was in medicine or a practicing physician. What was it that you tapped into? Because clinicians told you you had the aptitude, you had this natural ability. I don't know whether you kind of knew it or not or valued it or not, but what did you tap into? Because just saying, hey, I want to go pursue a medical degree, that's not trivial. That's a whole life shift. So what did you tap into that really got you into that and saw you through the process of becoming a double board certified neurologist?
I feel like people get put into your pathway for a reason. So there was one night when I used to sell this bisphosphonate called Fosamax. Fosamax is a drug by a certain drug company. And I used to sell it. And I went to this thing called a bone club. And I met a geriatrics doctor that looked like me. She was
Mm,
young. She was a geriatrics fellow. And she became my first friend in my friend group that turned out to all be Black women physicians. Like everybody in my friend group around that time, I looked around and either they were a physician or they were married to a physician or they were a pharmaceutical sales rep or some sort of medical background. And I remember having this thought like the doctors were saying, "Hey, you have the aptitude, you should think about pursuing a career in medicine." And at the same time had no one to answer to. I'm single, no kids, and then I met her. And she introduced me to this world of people that look like me that were physicians. And I thought this is not coincidence, right? And at the same time I'm training to do a 5K. Like I can remember all of these things in such great detail. And I remember running with my friend who she's a psychologist and she's married to an ER doctor, and I looked at her and said, "I think I want to try and go to medical school." And without hesitation she said, "Of course you can." Being around those type of people, you can't help but level up. So your friend group, your circle is so important, because all of us have these dreams. All of us have these visions of greatness. And it's a matter of us putting ourselves in situations that allow us to flourish those dreams and pour into those dreams and people to encourage you and not downplay anything that you have the audacity to dream and do. So I think that's where it came from is me recognizing that friend group that I had and recognizing that this is not coincidence. This is God putting them into my location for a reason because that friend group is the reason why I kept pursuing it even when I didn't get in the first time, the
mm.
second time, the third time. And then somebody one in that friend group said, "Hey, have you thought about a post-bac program?" I was like, "What's a post-bac program?" So she introduced me to that concept and that got me into medical school. So that is, I think, one of the biggest reasons why I was able to do what I was able to do.
So, Dr. Kim, our audience are generally non-medical people. We have some industry folks, but generally speaking, we speak to those who have a non-medical background. Can you tell us about what it is to practice neurology? What are the range of diseases that a neurologist will treat?
So, neurology, what I like to say is that the brain controls everything. Literally, everything is controlled by the brain. And I think I have kind of a controlling personality, and it's probably why I pursued neurology. Um, And it ranges from things like strokes, like everybody's heard of a stroke, to migraines, to movement disorders like Parkinson's disease, demyelinating disorders or autoimmune disorders like multiple sclerosis, very devastating diseases like ALS. So it ranges from any type of disease that touches the nervous system. So the central nervous system, like the brain, or the peripheral nervous system, like the nerves that cause numbness and tingling in our fingers. That is every aspect of that can be a neurological disease.
So, what makes these different diseases so challenging? Some are familiar with Alzheimer's or other neurological diseases. Like you said, there's many of them. But what makes them so difficult or challenging?
We're still just learning so much about the brain.
Hmm.
Like we're still learning about the different receptors and the changes in our body that the brain has control over that we didn't realize before. The other thing is that these diseases that when they are triggered or when they are manifested in your body, um, they're there for the rest of your life. Like curative disease, curing these diseases is still a frontier that we're trying to get to. So, like patients with Parkinson's disease, we treat them, but actually curing them from Parkinson's is still something that is a dream that we're trying to get and trying to pursue.
So let's double click on that. So some may be familiar with Parkinson's. Is there a genetic or an environmental link or factors that lead to certain diseases like a Parkinson's or even Huntington's disease is in the news lately because this is a disease that we've made tremendous strides in
Mhm.
finding the genetic link and then designing medications that can at least slow the progression or um, modify the disease a little bit. But what's that whole thing around genetics with neurological diseases that you guys are putting your fingers on and research these days?
So, I mean, I think looking at genetic mutations, the mutations are the biggest thing that we are looking at in neurology. And so, for those who don't understand mutations, when your genes are always replicating, always, and you have certain sequences that are supposed to be together, and certain sequences that, when they happen, that causes a mutation that can cause unchecked growth or can cause a protein to form in a way that's abnormal and create a pathology that leads to disease, right? So we have found in things like Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's disease, in ALS, that there are people who have either genetic predispositions for those diseases or that gene can trigger the disease in them at a certain age or at younger ages. So that's where genetics come in. So we know that, for instance, Alzheimer's disease, there is an early onset Alzheimer's disease out there that has a genetic component to it. And those for patients that present to us with symptoms of Alzheimer's disease, brain scans that look like Alzheimer's disease, but they're under the age of 65, we would run their genetics to see if that's what it is. And not really from a treatment standpoint for the patient, but for their generations to come to understand that this is the type of genetic predisposition or genetic marker that they already have that they could pass on to their loved ones.
Well, and that's exactly why we do this podcast, Dr. Kim. We really want to give people the language and then also the confidence to know these terms, to have these conversations with their care providers um, and their family members, to become
Mhm.
better advocates for their health to this type of approach, to ensure that they're comfortable incorporating these types of insights into their conversations. Um, when we're talking about like the whole nature versus nurture aspect, You were just talking about our environment, and this is a topic that I absolutely want to talk about on my podcast is epigenetics because it's kind of wide and broad and deep. But what role does the environment? Because we talked about the fact you just talked about the fact that you will do genetic testing on some of your patients to see if there is a link. But the environment, what role does lifestyle,
Mm.
um, environment, diet, behaviors, habits, what do they contribute to developing diseases like Alzheimer's or others?
So you hit on the key word is lifestyle.
Hmm.
And one thing that I think that we as Gen Xers, because we have the hustle mentality down to a T, I feel like we are the ultimate hustlers in our generation. But what that mentality has given us from a flourishment standpoint has taken away from us from a health standpoint. And the reason why I say that is because of sleep. Genetics and sleep are two things that need to really be looked at because one of the things that happens during sleep is our genes are the replication of those genes. If we have actually made a mutation, there's these little things that come out during deep parts of sleep that allow our genes to be changed over. Like, okay, this A and T, okay, that's supposed to be an A and a T together from a gene standpoint. There's actually a C sitting here. Let me move that over and put. So these little things are coming out. These little proteins, these little things are coming out during sleep. So lifestyle is huge. Diet is huge. We could do a whole episode on the diets and genetics and how our diet can affect our genetics.
Hmm.
But it's all about creating mutations, basically. If you've been from a simplest standpoint, you're trying to decrease the amount of mutations that could cause cancer or cause disease. And by your lifestyle, you have that's the control that you have to hopefully focus in on things like whether you eat organic or conventional food, the amount of sleep that you're getting, the amount of deep restorative sleep that you're getting. Those are the things that we have to be focused on from a simplistic standpoint.
I can tell you, Dr. Kim, since like the pandemic. Now, I've always been a guy who, even from college, I stay up late. I'm most productive from like 10 to 2 in the morning, 10 the night, 2 in the morning. And I stayed that way for most of my adult working life until the pandemic came. I fell back in love all over again with sleep. Okay. And just the fact that I'm getting in restorative sleep, and of course, I've got a wife who tells me that I snore. I don't know. I've never heard it, but she made me get a mouthpiece, like a device, and that even enhanced my sleep even more. I didn't know that I wasn't getting deep sleep. So, just on the topic of just brain health, okay, forget like once something is diagnosed or we're having symptoms. Just on the topic of brain health, you were just talking about diet. What are some other things that you recommend to your patients that helps us keep our brain active for the long term and stave off diseases like Alzheimer's?
Again, sleep, diet. So having a diet that's rich in fruits and vegetables, like fresh fruits, fresh vegetables. That mean things that we know, right? But things that we don't think about as we age are things like weight training. Weight training of all things. That can cause out of our muscles when we're weight training. This substance called BDNF comes out, and it preferentially goes to the areas of your brain called the hippocampus. The hippocampus is the seahorse shaped thing in your brain on both sides of your temporal lobes that is very important in cognition and memory. So much so that when I have a patient that comes in with memory issues and I've scanned their brain, I'm looking at that part to see if it's atrophied or shrunken, that hippocampal area, right? And that'll give me a window as to how bad their disease is. So BDNF goes to that area while you're lifting and pumping iron and helps that area flourish and fluff up and grow. This studies have shown that. So these are things. And so I have patients who will say, well, I don't lift weights anymore. I'm like, can you do a squat? And I have them do a chair squat in the office. And they'll do that. And I'm like, okay, then this is what I want you to do. This is your prescription. Get some 10-pound weights. Go to Walmart, go to wherever you need to go and get you some weights. Do the squats. do some push-ups. They're like, I can do push-ups. Yeah, of course you can. Do some push-ups. I have them really focus in on what they can do from a physical standpoint. Hydration's huge because your brain needs water, your body needs water to function correctly. And then, like you said, sleep. Sleep is so important from a brain function standpoint. All of us know that um, we need a decent amount of sleep. And you just said it, that you started to realize that the restorative sleep that you were lacking in the past, now that you have it, you relish it and you don't want to give that up, right? But then there's also the toxins that we willfully give ourselves every day. So about 2 years ago, in 2023, um, my husband and I were in the midst of trying to do some things for our health. And he was taking like I don't know, it was an antibiotic or something, where he couldn't drink alcohol. And I said, okay, I'll stop drinking with you. And when I stopped drinking, I realized, why am I drinking? Why would I drink? Um, it's a direct neurotoxin, literally. Like it's directly killing your brain cells. So why would you willfully do that to yourself? And so I asked myself that question. And for me, I stopped drinking. So I don't drink alcohol anymore.
Well, it's moments like that that kind of to bring those moments of clarity to you when you actually, you know, make the effort, get over the hump, and you stop the habit. It's like, okay, what was that? Why was I doing it anyway? And it makes it easier not to go back. But that's a pretty big one.
It is a big one. And I think I've gotten a lot of flack from even the medical community. But there's more and more evidence that shows that this is toxic to our brain and to our other organs. And that we are literally willfully poisoning ourselves, by people saying, oh, the campaign of, oh, alcohol is okay, or a little bit of red wine. It's the phenols that are in grape leaves or grapes that is the actual antioxidant. It's not the alcohol. Come on. Jesus did make
Hmm.
water into wine, but come on. Let's just be real about it. That was not the same wine that we drink today.
Dr. Kim, I got to see if there's any antioxidants in the agave plant, I guess, from my tequila.
From the tequila. That's
Just
funny.
saying. So let's talk precision medicine in
Okay.
neurology. So precision medicine, its growth and the ability to really transform disease has been shown in cancer care, but using these genetic and genomic insights are now spreading into other diseases. What does the therapeutic landscape look like today for targeted therapies, gene targeted therapies that can modify diseases and dramatically improve outcomes for certain neurological diseases?
Let's think about something as basic as strokes. So secondary stroke risk factor standpoint. So you have a patient that came in with a stroke, and you want to prevent them from having another stroke. You're going to do what's called secondary stroke risk factor stratification. And one of the medications that most people get put on is a medicine called Plavix. And so we know that there are people whose genes will not allow them to respond to Plavix. They have this certain type of genotyping that causes them not to respond and for the medication to not work as well. And so that's very common, very, very common for us to look at their genetics and run this one genetic test. It's called a CYP-TC19 test, to look at whether they're going to be a responder to that medication, so that we know, okay, we can treat them with this dual therapy of aspirin and Plavix for the next 3 months, and they'll respond to it and decrease their risk of a secondary stroke. So that's very basic. That's the basic thing. But then you have diseases like ALS, and that's my fellowship training is in neurophysiology, and part of that was understanding neuromuscular disease, and a very strong component of that was ALS. And so we now have a way of looking at these genes, and this gene called SOD1 and C9orf72. Those are genes that have a higher risk of patients developing ALS. So much so that there's medication that looks at silencing the mRNA from those genes as a treatment standpoint. So when we have a patient that comes in, they're young, and then they might say, "Oh, my dad had this disease, or my mom had some weird thing that she died from, and we didn't really quite know." Or the thing is with ALS is this can be so subtle to devastating so quickly that sometimes patients don't even get diagnosed with it because it so quickly causes them to have, unfortunate deaths. So if a patient comes in young and they're telling us this story about their loved ones or their parent or an uncle or a cousin or someone, we're going to run genes on them to see if they might have this type of mutation and then, recommend that treatment for them.
So Huntington's disease is recently in the news because there's a disease modifying agent, AMT 130, for people who are in the early stages of Huntington's disease. And the treatment works by halting part of the body's gene production responsible for producing that toxic Huntington protein.
Hmm.
And this is the promise of precision medicine, to be able to interject um, disease modifying molecules that can stop the downstream effect of certain genes. And when we think about like Alzheimer's disease, gosh, there's a huge unmet need. Parkinson's, you were just talking about for biomarker research and things like that. But like, if we like future pace this conversation of precision medicine and the growth of it in your practice, like, what can we expect not only from a healthcare improvement standpoint of our population, but from a healthcare spend in how we treat diseases?
So the cost of it is that's something that's like a whole nother ball of wax because these medications that we're putting patients on are pretty expensive,
Mhm.
right? And but the cost of them not being productive in society is expensive too.
See, yes.
So when you think about strokes, for instance, patients who are not able to work after their devastating stroke, that is income and money that could be funneled into the community that's been lost because and now you're actually having to take care of this patient because of their disability, correct? So you have to look at it twofold. Us doing the medication, will that end the disease or will that just keep them here and functioning to be able to be a productive part of society? You have to think about it from that standpoint when you're thinking about the finance of medicine. But I think when you're looking at what this means going forward, I think understanding your history is really going to be paramount. Understanding your family history is going to be paramount. I mean, as a patient, I'm talking here as a physician, but as a patient, I've had my genes looked at, and it's because I have a family history of different types of cancers. I mean, I was blessed that my mom had 8 brothers, but like 4 of her brothers died of prostate cancer.
Mm.
And I'm like, okay, why? Why is that? So I remember telling my doctor this and talking to her about cancer risk and cancers that have been in both sides of my family. And she said, that's enough for me to recommend that you get your genetics looked at. And so I've had that reviewed and looked at to make sure that I didn't carry any of the like HER2 positive, any of those types of things for breast cancer or ovarian cancer. And because prostate cancer can make that, she made that connection. So I think that that's where your knowing your family history will affect your future outcomes going forward. So that's to me one of the basic things that we need to do as patients and as caregivers is to make sure that we understand and have a good history of our family history.
So I got to ask you this as a treating clinician, and with more patients that I have interviewed on this platform, I used to think it was cultural because, as I always say, like, my mama was always, "Don't you go out of this house to talk about our business." So I just thought it was just my household, but it turns out it was a lot of people's household. And as a result of that, people didn't know their family's medical history. They know, Aunt Susie died in her 30s, but don't
Hmm.
know why, right? Or
Hmm.
they know that their grandmother or their grandfather may have passed away. And the way that it was explained to them is he had cancer in his lungs. and he didn't even smoke, but that could have been metastatic disease from somewhere else. How, and I guess the question for you as a clinician, as important as it is for us to know our family history now, but also in the future with these genetic and genomic medicines that are targeted to certain folks, if we knew that, we could probably take advantage of it. But how many patients actually come in and know that information?
I think sadly not that many, but if you have a clinician that's interested, you can ask it in a way for them to really give you a good history. So that's what I've really been able to, from a training standpoint and for my 10 years in practice, that's what I work on is not putting the onus on the patient, but really asking the right questions so I can get a better understanding of their history. But as a patient, that's what I would tell patients is that knowing your history and your family history is paramount. From things as little as migraines, because we know that there's a genetic predisposition for migraines, to type 2 diabetes, to mental health. All of these things have genetic predispositions. So understanding your family's history is like, I think that's one of the things that doesn't cost any money. It just cost a conversation. So the holidays are upon us. Having those conversations in between the commercials of the football game, doing that type of work, and really people go to family reunions and they write down the family tree, or somebody's doing the genealogy. But I think if we did this from a genealogy standpoint of disease, we could really focus in on, okay, what's common amongst our ancestors and how are we going to stop this from happening?
With what you're doing, you've got a great platform on social media. She's a fantastic follow, and you have all the platforms. Real quick, could you give them your website or your most active, I guess, social media platform so they can follow you?
So I'm most active on Instagram. I'm Dr. Kim Neurodoc there. I'm also on TikTok on the Tickety Doc. So yeah, I do the same name there. And then my website is drkimberlyjhatchett.com. And I have a newsletter that comes out every other week. And fingers crossed in 2026, we'll go to a weekly newsletter. But every other week right now, and it's been out for a year. It's called The Bluff, the bottom line up front. It's written like a business brief because I do have that business background and I know that my attention is not great. And I surmise that most people's attention is not great. So it's a very quick read. So I try to give you the bottom line up front, the what's in it for you, and then give you some tools to improve on whatever topic we're talking about in the newsletter. So you can subscribe to that; it's free, and then you can follow me on those websites or on those platforms.
Have your daughters picked up that you're on TikTok yet?
They've picked it up and they understand it, but they're kind of like, I think they think it's cringe. I don't know.
It's like, yeah, mom, you're not doing anything
Right,
exciting there. Yeah,
right.
scroll. So I always ask our guests on the show whether they are our patients or, in the event that we have experts that can look into these different conditions that we're talking about, for three practical tips. Now, this is not a medical advice show by any stretch of the imagination, but what we want to do again is really empower our listeners and our viewers with the knowledge and the confidence to ask questions of their doctors, to ask questions of their family, to find out their family medical history. And in this particular case, what would be three practical tips that you would offer to for families battling progressive neurological disease, or families who suspect a loved one is developing disease? How should they approach that with their loved one and their loved one's medical staff to ensure they get the most innovative treatments?
I would say one big thing is write down your questions because you're going to forget them when you get in front of the doctor. And I've had that happen so many times. We're like, oh, I wish I knew. And I'm like, go in the portal, blah, blah, blah. And inevitably they don't go in the portal and write their question in. But write your questions down. If you have a appointment leading up to your appointment and you have question after question, have a little notebook, a little something that you write the questions down in. And make sure that you say to the doctor very clearly when they walk in, I have 5 questions that I need to have answered, and I have a space to write the answers in, and I know you have a fixed amount of time, but I really need to go through these 5 questions. You be very upfront with what you need. Okay.
Very
The
good.
second thing is understand what medications you're on and your problem list. I have patients that come in and say, I don't have any medical problems, but they're on 10 different medications. I'm like, sir, you have high blood pressure. You have high cholesterol. Oh, it looks like you have a little prostate issue because you're on this thing for, right. And then you have this and you have that. So I'm writing down their problems. Understand your problem list and whether you have problems or not. So that'll kind of help focus in on the conversation of what could be happening, why your feet are swelling, why all the different things that you might be thinking about. You showing your problem list helps us hone in on that because we all know that healthcare is unfortunately a business, right? And it's a business of numbers. So if you're able to focus in the conversation and focus your physician in on what you want to have happen, all the better because you'll walk out satisfied with what the care that you're getting. And the third thing is don't underestimate lifestyle. Please do not underestimate lifestyle. Lifestyle can make or break many diseases, even if they're chronic neurological diseases that we don't really understand why you got it. Like some patients with Parkinson's, unfortunately, they got it, and we don't really know why. It's idiopathic, but we know that having a good diet, getting good sleep, exercising, all of those things can help the disease slow down. We know that. So don't underestimate lifestyle as a way of treating and fighting even chronic disease.
Dr. Kimberly Johnson Hatchett, board certified neurologist and speaker. Hey, fun fact, I heard you just had a TED Talk, which was you checked off of your bucket list.
Yes.
So I don't know if it's going to be out by the time this airs, but what can you tell us?
So the TEDx is about this area of your brain called the default mode network. And it is the parts of the brain that are most active when you're daydreaming, when you're envisioning, and when you're not focused on outward stimuli. And the premise of the talk is that we need to utilize this part of our brain that we all have. It's a superpower that we all have to really envision our futures as we age and make us age better, stronger, faster. All the things that we want to do, we have to first think about it first. And then we can manifest it in real life. So that's what my TED Talk is about. It's about the default mode network. It's the key to aging strong.
That's powerful. Okay, so that's everything that I'm trying to practice right now. So I'm all about it. So please let us know so we can share this also on the episode pages at geneticsforhealthcare.com or wherever you get your podcast. Dr. Kim, thank you for being a guest on Genetics for Healthcare, a
Thank you
podcast
for
for
having me.
patients.
This is so exciting. I appreciate it, and I'm so excited for you.
This is Genetics for Healthcare, a podcast for patients.